We are approaching Rosh Hashanah. We are almost through the middle of Chodesh Elul, and it is only natural, as my minig is for all these years, when we approach Yomim Tovim, we dedicate the shiurim not to the weekly parsha, but rather in Yonah D'Yoma. So in Yonah D'Yoma is Tkiyas Shofar. In Yonah D'Yoma is also COVID-19, the coronavirus. So today we will be dealing with two specific shilas that many people ask, and I was approached by many Rabbonim from Israel, from Eretz Yisrael, and abroad, many different kehilas dealing with these questions. So in Eretz Yisrael, we have many shuls and yeshivas which have capsules. And the capsules are partitions, nylon sheets, which divide the shul into different sections. And every section has a small number of mispalalim, assuming that the virus won't escape from one capsule to the other. And the question is, when the Baal Tekeya is in one capsule and you are in another section which is divided by those big nylon partitions, could you be Yotzet Tkiyas Shofar? Or would it be similar to HaTorkeya L'Toich HaBor, Misha Oimed Chutz LaBor Lo Yotze Decher Vosoi? Because he did not hear an original called Shofar, but rather Koel Havora. That is one question. First part of today's Shia. The other question, could you cover the Shofar, the broad end of the Shofar, with a mask or any other sheet to prevent saliva droplets from being spread and spreading the virus? So those are the two practical questions we will be dealing. Chav Zayin Omed Beis B'Sechet Rosh Hashanah Tekeya L'Toich HaBor Im Kol Shofar Shoma Yotzo Im Kol Havora Shoma Lo Yotzo. So the formula, the wording of the Mishnah seems to indicate it depends what you hear. Tekeya L'Toich HaBor. The person blows the shofar into a cave, into a pit. Im Kol Shofar Shoma Yotzo Im Kol Havora Shoma Lo Yotzo. But the Gemara says it depends where the listeners are. If a person blows shofar in a cave, the people that are in the cave are yotza, but those that are outside the cave, they're not yotza. Why? They hear koil havora. So there's a big machlokes in Rishonim, Rashi and the Rosh. The Rosh learns from Rosh and Rashi. Those that are standing outside the pit, outside the cave, it depends what they hear. If they hear Kol Shofar, it's okay. If they hear Kol Havora, it's not okay. And in a few moments, we will deal with the question, what exactly is Kol Havora? What does that mean? How do we understand the concept, the idea of Kol Havora? But Rashi maintains, if you're standing outside, it depends what you hear. And the Rosh, Perek Gimel, Siman Ches, Masechet Rosh Hashanah disagrees with Rashi, and the Rosh argues, so how would a person know what he hears, and what does that depend? Is it totally subjective? One person would say, I think I heard a Kol Shofar, and the other would say, no, I think it was different than a Kol Shofar. And if it depends on the shape of the cave, the depth of the cave, where exactly the Baal Tekeya was standing in the cave, Notatu Dvarecho L'Shiurim. So Chazal give us a halacha that is not detailed. How could we implement this halacha, and what would be the halacha l'maisa? And therefore the Rosh argues. Im Kol Shofar means if you're standing in the cave, then you're yotze because you heard Kol Shofar. Im Kol Havora yotze, because you're standing outside the cave, you're not yotze. According to the Rosh, anybody standing outside is not yotze. The Rambam, similar to Rashi. And according to the Rambam, Perek Alav Halacha Ches Melcha Shofar, if you're standing outside that cave, it depends what you hear. The Beis Yosef rejects the Rosh. And he says, I don't understand exactly what the kasha is. Yes, it depends what you hear. If you hear kol shofar, it's okay. If you don't hear kol shofar, then it's not okay. And therefore the Shulchan Aruch follows in the footsteps of Rambam and Rashi, according to Shulchan Aruch. If you're standing out at that cave, sometimes you will be yotze, sometimes you won't be yotze. I checked, and I took a Baal Tukeya and visited various different shuls. And I had him stand here, and I had him stand there. And I was in another capsule next to his. I moved to a second capsule, which is 2 capsules away from the Baal Tukeya. And to the best of my hearing, it was exactly the same. So based on the psak of the Shulchan Aruch, im kol shofar shomei yotzo. But the Taz comes along and complicates matters. Tov Kuf Pei Zayin Sif Kodnal of the Taz says, we do not rely on our bekiyas, like we find in various different sources, ein onu bekiyim. And therefore the Taz says, don't rely on your subjective hearing. So if the tekeh was b'toich habor, anybody standing chutz labor needs to hear tekiyas shofar again. Either he and the tekeh should be b'toich habor, or both should be chutz labor. However, when you hear it second time around without a bracha, because it's only a suffix. Most of the achronim follow in the footsteps of the Taz, and they are machmir, including the Chayodim Shulchan Aruch Harav. Mishnah Berurah Sif Koten Zayin says, if it's not a shas adchak, you need to be machmir. If it is a shas adchak, the Mishnah Berurah says, rely on the Shulchan Aruch. So before going any further and any deeper, I say, our situation definitely is a shas adchak for 2 different reasons. Number 1, pikuach nefesh. We do these capsules, try to do your best to prevent the spread of this virus. To my terrible dismay, there is an atmosphere lately, people are mezalzel. People think, it's over. It ain't over. Definitely not in Eretz Yisrael. Yesterday was the worst day. We had 3,000 new cases. So we don't hear of very many deaths, Baruch Hashem. But every day, about 10 people die. And those deaths affect everyone. The Arab community, the Jewish community, the Frum community. Every day we're losing people. But people are no longer interested. We have forgotten that kol hamakayim nefesh achas miyisol kilo kiyam olam molei. V'hama'abed nefesh achas miyisol kilo ibed olam molei. So the reason we have these capsules is just trying to prevent the spread of disease. And especially in those shuls that have the capsules. So what do you expect them to do? It's impossible that the Baal Tukeya should blow again and again and again and again and move from one capsule to the other. That will disrupt the tefillah entirely. It's impossible. And you can't have all the people crowding into one capsule. That's the greatest danger. And it's also impossible. There ain't enough room. So it definitely is a shas adchak, and b'shas adchak, even according to the Mishnah Berurah, you rely on the Shulchan Aruch. Im shoma kol shofar yotzo. And to me, it is clear that our subjective hearing, what we hear, is the exact same kol shofar. I want to go beyond this and say, even the Taz would agree, shelo b'shas adchak, in our case, that we're yotze. That very same Taz, Tov Kuf Pei Zayin, Tzif Kotnal of the Taz, argues that if a person blows in the Beis Knesses, the people that are standing outside the shul, they hear the kol shofar through the windows. But that is like, and the Taz says they should be machmir. If you heard from the outside, you need to hear again. Without a bracha, but you need to hear again. However, the Taz says, in that case, I do feel that a person could rely on his subjective hearing. So the Taz himself, and he is the Moreh D'Shmaitze, he is the Machmir, differentiates between the actual situation of blowing in a cave in which he says, Misha oimet chutz labor tzarich lachzav veletkoya. Person that's outside the shul does not need to hear again. And why not? What exactly is koil havora? It's a mystery. But the Shulchan Aruch Rav writes, Hevel shebetoch habor. How does one translate Hevel? And I don't know exactly, but it is the dampness, being in a cave or in a subterranean pit. That is Hevel. We remember the concept of Hevel from Bava Kama. Niskei bor, Machloikes Rav and Shmuel, lahavloi oy lachavotoi. But in the capsules there is no Hevel. You don't feel any extreme humidity. There is no Hevel. Just like open space. Because the capsules are open. They're approximately 2 meters high, but they're totally open. And it's a thin sheet of nylon. There is no Hevel. The Bialocha Sif Aleph, dealing with the Taz, says, Koil Havora is only when it's Tat Karka'i, beneath ground surface, like caves, like pits, but not Chutz Lebeis HaKnesses. Benkach u Benkach, even the Taz agrees, Chutz Lebeis HaKnesses. It has a din of Chutz Lebor, but you could rely on your subjective feeling, on your subjective healing. And therefore, I think the capsules, Loi Gora, and you definitely could rely on what you feel and what you hear. And to me, it was clear as daylight, Keshemesh B'Tzoraim, that we hear an authentic and original Kol Shofar. What exactly is Kol Havora? Since I learned Lashon the first time in my life as a child, I always felt that Kol Havora is an echo. But it doesn't seem to be the case in the understanding of the Poskim. Because the Gemara says if you're within the pit or the cave, you are Yoitza. The echo is as evident, as obvious in the pit, in the cave, than outside. So why are you Yoitza? When we were kids, whenever we visited a cave, we liked to talk and shout and listen to the interesting feeling of the echo sounding from all the walls. We know that sound is waves, and the waves hit the ceiling, they hit the walls, and that is what we define as an echo. So why do Chazal differentiate between the people within the cave and those that are outside? Mishnah Berurah also quotes the Ramban and the Rashba that the Koil Havora is only towards the end of the Tkiyah. If we mean an echo, it's obvious from the beginning of the Tkiyah. Maybe it takes a split second till you hear the echo. I recently read some articles by professors, by sound mumchim, and they try to explain in scientific terms what is Kol Havora. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't really thoroughly understand what I read because it's not an area in which I am familiar. But they do seem to argue that we do know what Kol Havora is. And basically what they argued in those papers of research is that the echo disrupts the original voice, and the original voice is also distorted. That would explain Koil Havora. So I'm not smart enough to explain exactly what I read, but I do appreciate the fundamental understanding that the echo is not only an additional voice that we hear, but it disrupts the original voice, and maybe that would help us understand what is Kol Havora. But what is important is that the Shulchan Aruch paskins, it depends on your subjective hearing. And if to you, im Shofar, Kol Shofar Yotzo, and even the Taz would agree, an hour Shaila, not only because it's a Shasat Chag, even without Shasat Chag. It is no different than a Tokeh Bebeis HaKnesses, V'hashomea mechutz lebeis hakneses. If I would be 400 years ago, and many times I use this formula to apologize, I don't really understand the Taz. Ofa ve'efer alitachas kapis laglav. The Taz says, Ki yadua ein onu bekiyim. Who says ein onu bekiyim? Many areas in Shulchan Aruch, that's a machlokes, the Mechaber and the Ramah. And I think it goes beyond the Mechaber and the Ramah, and it touches upon the fundamental difference between Sfardim and Ashkenazim in Darkei HaPsak. So there are many sources. I will quote only 10. I think 10 should be enough. 10 is a magical number. Kol be'asor shchin tesharia. So I want to quote 10 sources in which the Mechaber says we need to check, and the Ramah says ein onu bekiyim. But the common denominator, the tzad shova between all these sources is we're dealing with something that demands a certain level of bekiyus. It demands expertise. But I don't know what type of expertise is required in Kol Shofar. So let's embark on a very short journey of 10 destinations. Shin Yud Zayin Sif Aleph and Hilchos Shabbos. The Mechaber follows the footsteps of the Rif and the Rambam, and the Mechaber says there is no kosher and mati diuraisa, only bekesher kiyuma and kesher uman. The Ramah says we don't know what a kesher uman is. There are 100 ways to tie knots. Once upon a time in the Boy Scouts, part of the training was tying knots. The Ramah says, we're not bookie, what's a kesher uman? There are 1,000 ways to tie knots. The Mechaber says, if it's not a kesher uman, it's only kosher derabanan. The Ramah says, we need to be choishish. Every kesher shel kiyuma might be a diuraisa because ein onu bekiyim. We skip 13 semonim. Shin lamed. Lagabe amekasha leiled. So, the tzar harav, we cut up in the mother's belly to save the child. And the Ramah says, ein onu bekiyim b'moisu em. It is hard to determine the exact second of demise. Ein onu bekiyim, and that's why we do not implement this halacha. So the Mechaber says, if the mother died, then we take out the baby. And the Ramah says, we can't determine the exact moment of death. Let's skip over to Yoredeya. Simalamed Gimel, B'dikas Aveishet. The Mechaber says we need to be B'dik the Veishet. The Gemara says Veishet ein lo b'dika mebachutz, elo mebifnim, and the Ramah says ein onu bekiyim. So we're machmir, machat shenimtza beveishet, we're machmir. Ein onu bekiyim bebedikes aveishet. Semenun hey, sif yud. Etzem akulis shenishbaro. Bosa choifa fall of kosher. Roifa yocha legordoi. And then Ramah says, ein onu bekiyim beroifa yocha legordoi. And therefore we need to be machmir. Semachov gimel and semachov daled. We're dealing with treifes al yedei shchita. And in 3 different seifim, Chav Demel, 1 seif and Chav Gimel, and 2 seifim and Chav Dalet, the Mechaber says we need to do a bedika, and the Ramah says regarding drosa, shia, chaloda, ein onu bekiyim. Simen Yud Ches is not ilchas treifes ilchas shchita, and there's a machlokes Mechaber in the Ramah exactly regarding bedikas asakan, and the Ramah once again says ein onu bekiyim. Sofik Drusa brings us back to Siman Lamed Gimel Sif Ches. Mechaber says we need to check. The Ramah says ein onu bekiyim. Teimas kfeila min b'she'ena minoi taroivis isur beheter bottle b'shishim. But the Mechaber says if you have a chef, a non-Jewish chef, let him taste, and he'll determine do we feel the taste of the isur or not. The Ramah in 2 different sources. So we could either say 10 or 11. 10 sugyas, 11 sources. Then I'm on Hilchas Basa B'chol of Tzadik Beis, Sif Aleph. Once again, Hilchas Taroivis, Tzadik Ches, Sif Aleph. The Ramah says, Ein anu soimchem al teimas kfeilo. The Ramah doesn't say why, but on Teres Chatas he does say why. Ein anu bekiyim. So I brought 10 different sources different sugis in which the Mechaber says, check, and the Ramah says, Einonu Bekiyim. But I think the Tzad HaShava is, in all these different areas, we're dealing with expertise. You need to be a boidik to be familiar with treifus. You need to be a shoichet to be familiar with bedikas asakin. Doctors could determine the exact time of demise. Not everybody is familiar with kshorim, with kesha uman, as I explained before. But exactly what's the problem of kol shofar? Who is the mumche in kol shofar? Do you need a conductor? Or a person that plays the trumpet? Who is the mumche? Definitely not the Baltakeya. The Baltakeya doesn't hear the kol shofar the same way we do. And he concentrates on his tkiyah. Would it be a Bal Makra? Maybe. I've been a Bal Makra for tens of years, but usually we don't concentrate in the quality of the Kol Shofar because Kol HaKoil is Ksherim B'Shofar. So I don't know what the Taz means, Ein Onu B'Kiyim. Beyond that, there are 3 different Seifim in Siman Tov Kuf Pei Vav, Tekeirat Torah Chaboras Tov Kuf Pei Zayin. 3 different Seifim Tov Kuf Pei Vav, and all are based on the Sugya Rosh Hashanah Chav Zayin. Tzipohu mibachutz. If you cover the shofar from the outside with a layer of a different substance, gold, silver, to decorate the shofar. Im nishtana koile memasha hoyo posul, im lo nishtana koile kosher. Nika v'shofar v'sotmoi, same halacha. Shofar betoch shofar. Im kol pnimi shoma yotzo, kol chitzoni shoma lo yotzo. Why doesn't the Taz say in these halachas, Einonu B'kiyim? So obviously, everybody is Buki B'koil Shofar. So why would there be a difference between Tov Kuf Pei Zayin and Shomei Tokei Torah Chabor, Lagabe Kol Avora, and the 3 Sifim in Tov Kuf Pei Vav, in which we also are Machalek? We differentiate Nishtana Koiloi, Loi Nishtana Koiloi. So the Taz is a Chiddush. But on the other hand, all the Achroinim bow their heads to the Taz. Shulchan Aruch Harav, Chayod, a Mishnah Brura. But the Mishnah Brura is Mekel B'Shas Adchak. And what I argued before, in our case, even according to the Taz, we could rely on our subjective hearing and feeling, Shekoil Shofar Yotza. And therefore, I don't think there should be a problem at all, Tkiyah Shofar in the capsules. How about covering the Shofar? Some doctors, medical professionals, are very concerned about Tkiyah Shofar. All we know about the virus is the main source, the main concern, the main cause of the spread of disease is microscopic saliva droplets that we all disperse or dispense. When we cough, when we sneeze, when we shout, even when we talk, we are scattering tens of thousands of tiny microscopic saliva droplets, and those droplets carry the virus. Sometimes you speak to a person and you feel his saliva touching your face or your hands, and it's very uncomfortable, very unpleasant. But that is a minority of people. All people scatter microscopic droplets of saliva, and that is the main source of infection. And that's why we wear masks. Blowing into the shofar should be far more dangerous and hazardous than just talking, because a person exhales powerfully. Every Baltakeya knows that after a few tkiyas, the shofar is wet. Did you ever notice a Baltakeya taking the shofar and pounding the shofar on his palm? That's to get the moisture out. And that moisture is saliva. probably most of it goes out of the shofar. Some of it stays in the shofar. And the shofar is klape malo. So if we would have eyes to see, we would see thousands, tens of thousands of little droplets going up and coming down. What goes up must come down. That's one of the laws of physics. So the question is twofold. Could we turn over the shofar and having the broad end of the shofar klape mato? That would seem to be much safer because the droplets would go down and gravitation would take them all the way down. But if we blow up, then those droplets are like a mushroom, like a nuclear mushroom, and it spreads out. And therefore, either we turn the shofar upside down or we cover the shofar. Turning it upside down would not be recommended. Tov Kuf Pei Hey, the Ramo brings a minhag. And the source of the minhag is in the Maril and the Rokeach. Pia shofar yelamala. Why? Olo olakim besruah. It's only a minhag. It's not ma'akev. But minhag Yisrael Torah. And maybe there's some special added value to this minhag. After all, the sources of this minhag are extremely fundamental. The Maril was the father of Minhagei Ashkenaz, and the Rokeach was the greatest mekubal of Chasidei Ashkenaz, the early Rishonim Chasidei Ashkenaz. We're dealing with Kiyas Shofar. Do you remember Mama Chazal? Imra lafon ezechronis kedei shetal ezechronichem lafon eletoivo b'meh b'shofar. So the chronis needs to go up. HaKadosh Baruch Hu oile mekisei adin v'yoshev al kisei harachamim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes up. Olo elakim b'sruah. We don't want anything to go down. And therefore, I disagree turning over the shofar. The Sfardim could be makel, because this is an Ashkenazi minhag. The Beis Yosef doesn't bring it. The Rama does. How about covering the shofar? So once again, I examined, I tested. I took the same Baltakei and the same shofar, and I listened to him numerous times without covering the shofar with. It's exactly the same quality. The voice isn't as powerful when the shofar is covered than when it's not. And that should be taken for granted. After all, sound is waves. Some of the waves are trapped in the shofar. We hope that the saliva is trapped in the shofar. Most of it probably is. That's why we use masks. So I just took a surgical mask, the green ones, cut it out, taped it onto the shofar hermetically. The voice was the same. Even the Taz in Tov Kuf Pei Zayin regarding Kol Havora, he says, Einonu Bekiyim. But in 3 different halachas in Tov Kuf Pei Vav, when we're not dealing with Tekel HaTorchabar, but Shofar Shetzipohu Mebachutz, it might change the Kol Shofar, Shofar Shenikav Vesotmoi, Shofar Betoch Shofar, 3 different halachas in Tov Kuf Pei Vav. In all 3 halachas we need to determine, Nishtana kol shofar loy nishtana. Is it the same quality or not? Do we hear the shofar apnimi or the chitzoin? Depends on the person what he hears, and even the Taz doesn't comment here. And therefore, in my opinion, if you cover the shofar with a mask, you could be yoitza lechatchila, and I don't see any problem. Would I say it's a chiyuv to do so? I don't know. If the Baltakei had corona, it's very unlikely that he poses a hazard. There are some reports that people are getting corona a second time around, but that is extremely unlikely, and I think it is extremely rare. Even if he didn't have corona, but if he's responsible and careful, and he never comes between people without a mask, and he is diligent about social distancing and about disinfecting his hands, I think we could assume that he is okay, that he isn't ill. And it also depends, could you space out? B'shas Kiyas, could people move aside? My shul is a relatively big shul, and we won't have many people Rosh Hashanah. So, people could just move aside. But if you're a little shtibel, and it's a crowded shtibel, and you're not confident that the Baltukeya doesn't carry the virus, I definitely would recommend covering the shofar al pi halacha. I don't see this as a problem at all, because I did numerous tests, and to me, it was an authentic, original kol shofar. So on both questions, I think mutar lachatchila, as I explained. So the Ritva and the Meiri, Daf Chov Zayin Amud Beis, regarding shofar shetzipur mebachutz, surprise to us. But the Rishonim say sometimes the kol could be altered and changed. So the Ritva and the Meiri says, Ad sheyamdu bikiyim, and they will say that it's an authentic kol shofar. I don't know exactly what bikiyim means. Who is a baki? So in the many sources, I brought that the Ramos says, Ein onu b'kiyim. Regarding kol shofar, obviously, we are baki, because the Taz doesn't comment. The Ritva and the Meiri says, Ad sheyamdu b'kiyim, but we do have b'kiyas. I think any person that hears shofar for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, is a baki, especially a Bal Makra, so I do consider myself a baki. I've been a Bal Makra for more than 20-odd years. And I have heard kol shofar for quite a few years, as you could assume. So I definitely think it's an authentic kol shofar, and one is yotzei. So we hoped and we prayed that when Rosh Hashanah comes along, this will be over, but it ain't over, to our terrible dismay. Numbers are ticking up in America and the East Coast. In Eretz Yisrael, things are bad. Yesterday we had 3,000 new cases in Israel, 3,000 in one day. Baruch Hashem, the vast majority will come out of it relatively easy. But I said many times, the only relevant number is not the 95% that'll do fine. It's the 5% or 4% or 3% or 1%. The relevant number is those that will die, and people are dying every day. Approximately 10 people every day that die in Eretz Yisrael. Some of them Arabs, some of them Jews, some of them frum. COVID-19 does not discriminate. Kol hamakayim nefesh achas kilu kiyam olam molei. Kol hama'abed nefesh achas miyisrael kilu ibed olam molei. So we do need to do everything within our power to follow the rules and to prevent the spread of disease. Imro lefonei malchios kedei shetamlachuni aleichem. Imro lefonei zechroines kedei shetala zechroinchem lefonei letoivo. So the essence of the shofar is twofold. Malchios. It is the coronation of the king of Melech Malchei Amlochim Hayom Haras Olam. And we exalt the kingdom, the kingship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our master, king of all the Olamis. But shofar is also about Zechroinus. And Rosh Hashanah Lamed Beis is a Machlokes Tanoim, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Where do we say Kedushas Hayom? By Malchias or by Zechroinus? And in Sichas Minchas Osha and Rosh Hashanah, I explained the essence of the Machlokes is, what is the essence of Rosh Hashanah, of Tkiyas Shofar? Is it more about Malchias or more about Zechroinus? But it definitely is the combination of the two, and the two are two sides of the very same coin. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu is king, we are his servants. If we are his servants, we need to serve. Do we? Do we? Do we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu as we should? So Malchias and Zechroinus are two sides of the same coin, and they interact. In Minchas Osha Moedim Chelek Aleph, the Lamdish is said, not the Sichas. There's a major discussion about Tkiyah Shofar. Machlokes Rambam Rabbeinu Tam is the Eker Mitzvah Tkiyah or Shmiyah. I think in Pnimius it's both Tkiyah and Shmiyah. Tkiyah is about Malchus. We blow the Shofar for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shmiyah is for us. Because the concept of Zechroinus is twofold. On one hand, Shetala Zechroinchem Lafonei Letoiva. Our Zechroin should go up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Zechroinus is also about our remembering. Zechroinus also reflects what the Rambam writes, Perek Gimel Mehilchos Tshuva. Afal Pishet Tkiyah Shofar Gezeres HaKosev Remez Yesh Bo Keloimar. Uru Yeshena Mishinaschem V'nerdoma Makitzu Metar Damaschem Zichru Berechem Chipsu B'masechem V'chizru B'tshuva. אלו השוכחים את האמת בהבלי הזמן ושויגים כל שנוסם בהבל וריקה שלא יועיל ולא יציל. הביטו לנפשכם. היטיבו דרכיכם ומעלליכם ויעזוב כל אחד מכם את דרכי הרע. וסמחשבת שלא יטויבה. When we hear the shofar, we need to feel the shofar is an awakening call. It's a rallying call. Uru yeshena mishenaschem, wake up from your slumber, from your terrible slumber. Hashoichechem esu emes behevlei azman v'shoigim kol shenosam behevel v'rik shelo yo'il v'lo yatzil. So the Tkiyah and Shmiyah are Malchias and Zechroinus. I think the Tkiyah and the Truah also reflect two different aspects of Shofar. By the Chatzoitzes and Parshas Ba'aloischu we learn וביום שמחסכם ובמועדיכם ובראש חדשכם ותקעתם בחצויצס. So the chatzoitzes, the tkiyah, is an expression of simcha. והויו כי סובוי מלחמו על ארצכם והראויסם. The truah is an expression of shivroin leiv, genuche gonach, yeluli yolal, crying and sobbing. So there's the two sides of shofar. Tkiyah or truah? What is the more important? My feeling is the truah, because the posuk doesn't mention tkiyah. Yom truah yeh lochem. Chazal teach us. Each truah must have a tkiyah lefaneo and a tkiyah lachareo. The way I see it, the tkiyahs accompany the truah. They supplement the truah. So in my hashkafa, the essence of Rosh Hashanah is truah, tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, uru yeshena mishenaschem. We need to be besimcha as well. The Navi says, Yichlu madanim shtumim takim, shilchu monos le'enochan loi. Ched v'asa Hashem yima'uzchem, and the Torah in the beginning of Elchasson Shon writes, yes, we're happy. We're Saimach. We have B'tochen and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He will forgive all our sins. Yes, we are confident. We are confident that if we do tshuva, things will be just fine. If we do tshuva. So first and foremost is the truah. Awaken from your slumber. Uru yeshena mishenaschem. Come back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then trust the Kodesh Baruch Hu and be confident. Yes. Yamin chu pshuta lekabel shovem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu stretches out keviyochel his arms to bring us in, to bring us back, to bring us home. He's waiting for us. If we do tshuva, things will be fine. But we need to wake up. We have a mitzvah of tkiyah, but the Rambam makes it clear the ikar mitzvah is shmiyah. We blow the shofar for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We need to listen to the shofar for our benefit. Listen carefully, because the shofar speaks to you, to me and to you and to each and every one of us. Uru yeshena mishenaschem v'nirdomim hakitzu metar damaschem. Ya'azov kol echad mekem es darkei hara v'esmachshavtoi asher lo toiva. Let's come back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ba'ava u'v'yira. Tichla shona v'kira lo yiseo. Tochel shona v'berch yiseo. We should be mavasa b'soides toives, Yeshuas v'lachamos. A good gebenched yor. We should all be zeicha to aksiva v'chasim etoiva b'sifran shel tzadikim gemurim. And to ashnas geula v'yeshua b'mheiro v'yomeinu. Amen.